Hi there. This is the voice behind Social Theory Watch, the newly created Twitter account that has been monitoring online social theories and their effects, as well as how they are relevant to real-life events. So, this first episode is about the Twitter harassment case. The accused is Gregory Alan Elliott, and it is a criminal case. Therefore, the Crown is the prosecutor. He's being prosecuted by the Crown. And the main witnesses are Steph Guthrie and Heather Reilly. This is not a civil case where one party is trying to win monetary compensation from another party as a result of a conflict. No, that is not what this case is. This case is a case of criminal prosecution by the state. And the subject of prosecution is a man who has not made any specific threats towards either of the women in question, who in this case are actually witnesses in the case. What that means is that the Crown has all the power. All parties agree that none of Mr. Elliott's tweets included any threats. Also, Twitter never shut down his account upon the request of these women who tried to shut him down first that way. Twitter made the decision that his timeline did not contain anything that broke their rules, their terms of service. So that was their first attempt to shut him down and shut him up, and it didn't work. So they cherry-picked a series of tweets that were in his timeline and somehow created a story that makes it sound very much like he's a troll who was out to get them. I'd like to address some questions or myths that are often brought up in a lot of materials that I see relevant to this case. A lot of people post their own YouTube videos, a lot of people post their own articles, a lot of people post their own thoughts on Twitter regarding this case. And there's a couple themes that I see pop up regularly. One of the most common questions is, how is this even a case? How come this case isn't open and shut? How did it get this far? What is it doing in a court? It is a very good question, and I have some answers for that. A normal, reasonable person who's never had any experience with Canada's justice system in any way would assume that we have a justice system just like, every other Western country that we would assume has a system that is just and fair and has mechanisms in place that will exonerate anyone that is actually innocent, and a system in place that generally would dole out a fair verdict in a case like this. That's what we would assume. But it's not true, and I think a lot of people are still learning this about Canada. A lot of people still are in the dark that it's not true. So basically, when charges are brought, the complainants go to the police first to press charges. They tell their story to the police, and the police will decide if charges should be laid. So first we have to get through that phase. So you have to ask the question, well, what did Steph Guthrie and Heather Reilly say to the police to make them believe their story was worthy of handing over to the Crown for building a case for prosecution? You have to ask yourself this question. We don't know the details of that. We don't have access to the police transcripts of their statements. The fact that they were able to claim that they feared for their lives apparently was enough for the police to lay charges and hand it over to the Crown. The Crown has established its case against Greg Alan Elliott. He gets arrested. So generally in these cases in Canada, in any criminal case, nobody gets warning, either if A, they're being investigated, or B, they're about to be arrested and questioned in connection with charges made against them. Greg gets arrested. He has to have a bail hearing. In the bail hearing, one of the conditions that was laid upon him that the Crown insisted upon, because remember, the Crown has all the power in these cases. In any criminal prosecution, the Crown has all the power, despite what you might think. So the Crown demands that Greg Alan Elliott has no access to the internet, does not use the internet, no computers, nothing that communicating via the internet. No smartphones, no computers, yada yada. So the reason why this is a major problem for Greg Alan Elliott is because he's a freelance graphic designer, which means he doesn't have a place where he goes 9 to 5 and gets fired. What it means is that he's not allowed to inquire for work, any projects, any freelance projects at all, because the only way he can do that is online. And the only way he can work on those projects is online, on a computer. Now, he may be able to do some work on a computer that isn't connected to the internet, but he has to be very careful, because if there's any trace of him having any communications whatsoever via the internet, the courts will put him in jail, period. This is devastating for him and his family, not only because he's no longer able to contribute financially to the family with what his trade and skills are, but also because that is his work, that is what he knows, and that is what he loves, and he's been denied that. It's been taken away from him. And that is one of the things the feminists love to do. They love to attack anything that makes the man a man, whatever that might be for that man. And generally, it is their career. They know that one way to ruin a man and beat him into submission is to ruin his career. And I know this firsthand, not because of Greg Alan Elliott's case, but my husband. This also happened to my husband. But anyway, that's another story for another video. I've covered police charges. I've covered the Crown building a case. The next step is a preliminary inquiry. Now, people generally assume that a preliminary inquiry, it's basically like a pre-trial. It's the trial to determine if the evidence is sufficient enough to allow for a case with a reasonable prospect for conviction. So you would think that the evidence would be presented in that case, and then it would just fall apart, and this case would have just gone away. Charges withdrawn, judge just would have tossed it, you know. That's what a lot of people assume happens in these preliminary inquiries. But no, that is not how Canada justice system works. Actually, the preliminary inquiry is basically an automatic step to the trial. If you've even made it to the preliminary inquiry, you're screwed, especially if you're a male being accused by a woman. So, the man has to pay thousands of dollars to a lawyer for a hearing that is assumed to determine whether or not the case is even enough of a case to go forward, when it's going to happen anyway. It's going to go to trial anyway, and then he's going to have to pay again for his trial. This is also why he is $80,000 in debt thus far. Okay, so the preliminary inquiry ends, and basically, well, one thing I can tell you that I know for a fact, what it does do is it allows the defense counsel and the Crown to work with a judge to determine how the accusers, or the complainants, the Crown's witnesses, in this case Steph Guthrie and Heather Reilly, it determines how the defense counsel is allowed to question them, how much of their personal lives they are allowed to question, relevant to the case, relevant to the facts of the case. All the preliminary inquiry does these days is it sets the boundaries and defines the line of questioning that is allowed, particularly by the defense counsel. The Crown can pretty much ask anything, and the Crown can submit anything, and the Crown can discredit as much as they want the accused. But the defense counsel does not have any of those luxuries. They have to fight to be able to ask any of those questions and cross-examine anything related to their credibility, or anything that could potentially damage their credibility. Now that they've resolved the line of questioning that will be allowed in the trial, that is the next phase. So here now we're in the trial. A lot of the arguments that were heard in the preliminary inquiry will be heard in the trial as well by a different judge. The arguments will be more refined, and it's still pending. No verdict has been made yet. In my personal view, it looks like the Crown is doing everything she can to vindicate these feminists, which do happen to be very politically connected in the liberal sphere, and the feminist sphere, which is very much embedded in our government. Whether the liberals are in a majority or not doesn't matter. So that's basically how come this is not an open and shut case. How did this even get to become a case? How did it get to the point where these women even went to the police, and the police were even willing to listen to them and listen to their story and lay charges, criminal charges? How was that even allowed to happen in our society? Very good question. And again, it goes back to feminism. Feminism is not a new thing in Canada. And feminism ruling people's lives, particularly men's lives, and ruining them, is not a new thing in Canada. The justice system for decades has been writing documentation for our police forces across the country, educating them on how to handle complaints by females, by women. Because essentially women are a protected class in Canada. They have special rights that only white men don't have. Basically, in Canada, white men are the only class that is not protected in any way in Canada. When females go and make a complaint, criminal harassment, sexual harassment, online harassment, anything, it doesn't matter. The cops have to take their complaints seriously, no matter how ridiculous they may come across to them. Because the cops are scared to death that they will be labeled as a police force that do not take violence against women seriously. So politically, it's very important to them to not have that accusation made against their force. So they proceed. And even though the cops will tell the Crown, we did our investigation and we didn't find any criminal activity against the accused that we would see worthy of laying charges or criminal charges against, we still leave it up to you, dear Crown, if you would like to make a case out of this. I don't know how that's allowed to happen, but that's what happens, because I've read so many cases, including my husband's and in Gregory Alan Elliott's case, where the police will actually testify at trial and say that as far as they were concerned, the accused was not or ever a threat, period. So with that in mind, how is it that the Crown is allowed to make a case out of this anyway? I don't know, but that's how it works in Canada. Personally, I think whichever the verdict is, it's going to be a bad outcome because of the propaganda spin that can happen. If it rules in the favor of Gregory Alan Elliott, the feminists are going to spin propaganda like crazy and say that our Canadian justice system is not doing enough for victims. Yes, that's what's going to happen. I guarantee it, mark my words. The other thing that makes this case so important is free speech. One of the twisted things you will hear is feminists also saying the same thing, but in their minds it's something different. To them, free speech means freely being allowed to bully people online. Bullying them into submission, bullying them into shutting up, bullying them into not debating their ideology. That's what free speech means to feminists. But this case, what this means is that Gregory Alan Elliott, people like him, there will be a chilling effect on people like him being able to try and have a discussion with a feminist, speak up with compassion on their own differing views regarding their ideologies, and speak out with passion against things that they feel are wrong. Gregory Alan Elliott never tried to bully these women off the internet. But they did that to him.